This factory part in a Walther PDP could get you injured, killed, held civilly liable, or get criminally prosecuted. Walther advertises the PDP, or the Performance Duty Pistol, as exactly that, a pistol that performs and is ready for duty use. Now, I've had my issues in the past with the PDP's performance and even its reliability. However, today I want to look at a factory part that comes on several PDP models that completely questions the reliability, safety, and legality of classifying some PDPs as duty pistols. Now, when talking about performance with the PDP, something everyone focuses on is the trigger, saying that the Walther PDP's trigger is really, really good, and especially the dynamic performance trigger that is in this model here and comes in a lot of Walther's Pro models. If we look here at the dynamic performance trigger, you can see the performance that it has. We've got some take up here to the wall, minimal take up, a nice defined wall, there's no creep at all, and then nice clean glass rod break, and then we got our reset, nice positive forceful reset, and our glass rod break again. So a very, very nice trigger. There is no argument that the PDP, especially the Pro model that has the dynamic performance trigger, is not a high performing trigger. However, that's where some of the issues come that I want to talk about today, because the dynamic performance trigger, per Walther's literature, is unsafe for any serious use whatsoever. Now, I'm going to read directly from Walther's literature, the owner's manual of the dynamic performance trigger, and then we'll talk about how this impacts the PDP Pro X and other PDP Pro models. Personalizing a pistol with a trigger upgrade elevates selected Walther pistols to a match grade level. Main advantage of a drop-in trigger is reduced take-up and trigger pull. A match grade trigger may fire due to impact or light contact with it. Due to the high risk of an unintentional discharge, utmost care must be taken. So if what I read from Walther saying that this trigger here can fire due to impact or light contact and has a high risk of an unintentional discharge, so you have to take the utmost care, to me that's rather concerning as an owner of this pistol, and it makes me want to never carry this pistol whatsoever. Now, I know a lot of Walther fans out there might be saying, well, wait a minute, isn't that a drop-in trigger and the trigger inside this gun is installed by Walther gunsmiths and Walther themselves? Yes. But ultimately, it's a drop-in kit that requires the removal of a couple pins. There's no crazy gunsmithing that's required. In fact, they literally give you instructions on how to do it, meaning a gunsmith is not required to do so. They're showing you how to do it in that same manual. So therefore, why would the installation by a Walther tech or a gunsmith or anything be any different than the installation you do yourself? It's a pretty basic installation. Now, the other thing people are going to bring up is the fact that in the past, when people bought the drop-in DPT trigger kit, it did not match the DPTs they would find in Walther PDP Pros. If we look at two different posts here, one from the Walther forum from about 2 years ago, and one from Reddit from about 3 years ago from the Walther subreddit, you can see two different owners that both had Walther PDP Pros and stock base model PDPs and went out and purchased the drop-in DPT kits. Now, I'll link those posts in the description down below so you can check them out for yourself and know that I'm telling you the complete truth here. But when you check out those posts, you see that both of these posters put the drop-in kit trigger in their stock PDP on the left and then had their PDP Pro with the OEM from the factory DPT on the right. And if you look at these, there's a noticeable difference in the sear housing. While the trigger shoe and the trigger bar is the same, the sear housing is different. Noticeably, the ejector on the drop-in DPT kit is noticeably shorter than the OEM one on the PDP Pro. The other thing you'll notice is some of the mechanisms internally are a little bit different as well. So that should end this right here and now, right? Obviously, the PDP Pros do not have the full effect of this trigger. They don't have that full sear housing assembly. It's not the same as the drop-in kit, so it should be far safer. Well, you'd be right, except for this PDP Pro X has the exact same sear assembly as the drop-in DPT kits, meaning this is the same trigger system as far as I can see, and I cannot find any literature or any posts that conflict with this. As far as I can see, this is the same trigger assembly. This is the same trigger mechanism that Walther warns has a high risk of an unintentional discharge. Now, I'm sure someone's going to make the argument as well, that's not a duty pistol. That's a competition pistol. It has a compensator on it. It has a fancy trigger. It comes with a magwell. That's not a duty pistol. Well, according to Walther's tech sheet and their sell sheet, you would be wrong. On Walther's website, on the page for both the PDP Pro X compact and full size, it has this language right here in the tech sheet. PDP Pro X PMM compact, not just for competition, it's for everyday carry as well. And then the full size, which I'm holding right here. PDP, Pro X, PMM full size, uncompromising reliability for everyday duty. So that makes it pretty clear that this pistol right here that has the same trigger assembly as a warning saying that this has a high risk of an unintentional discharge is somehow also safe and reliable for everyday duty use. That doesn't really make sense. Now, what are the possible concerns of that, right? You might be reading that and say, well, I've never had an issue with my PDP, and I've never had an issue with this one either, nor the other PDP Pro I took a look at, nor the original PDP I took a look at. None of them had any sort of unintentional or uncommanded discharges or anything similar. And looking at the PDP, you'd think, well, it's pretty clear this trigger's not going to go off on its own. It has a trigger dingus, so this trigger can only go off when fired, and the trigger dingus is actually actuated. And I would agree, except I don't know all the inner workings of the PDP, and it has a potential that something in the sear housing back here could potentially go off on its own, even though the trigger is not being pressed. Now, I don't know that for sure. I don't know the full inner workings of the PDP to a gunsmith level or an armorer level, but just from what I can see, I don't have that concern. However, on a practical level, I do kind of have that concern. Because let's say you are working somewhere and you have this carried inside the waistband appendix perhaps, and you bump into something, or you have, one of those light contacts or an impact that Walther was describing. Well, this thing goes off and now you sing one octave higher, or depending what this hits, you don't sing at all.
You think that place can hold me? You're dead, copper! You're all dead!
But all that's after the castration and full frontal lobotomy.
Wait, what?
So this could cause serious injury or death based on the fact that Walther was saying that. Now, like I said, I don't see anything to support that, but that doesn't mean it can't happen. Just because there's not mass reports of this happening like the SIG P320 doesn't mean it can't or hasn't happened. Perhaps the right conditions haven't occurred, because clearly Walther has seen those conditions or predicted those conditions to occur and says, hey, there's a potential for this to happen. Now, safety concerns aside, my greater concern is in the civil and criminal realm, because the only time I've really seen people held criminally liable for a shooting where the shooting itself would have been justified, but based on the circumstances, they still were criminally charged for something like manslaughter, are cases with hair and modified triggers. People have been criminally held liable. People have gone to prison for things like manslaughter because their trigger was modified or different, or in such a way there was literature saying that this trigger was not safe to use for everyday carry or duty use. The reason this could happen is, let's say you get into a situation where there is an attacker who poses a deadly threat, and you present your Walther PDP Pro with the DPT trigger in it at this deadly threat, and in the course of that, you fire your pistol, or your pistol fires towards that individual. Later on in the interview with law enforcement or in the courtroom, you are not 100% confident you shot that individual, or perhaps for one reason or another, based on the trauma, you do not remember pulling the trigger. And you say, I don't remember pulling the trigger. I just pulled my gun out of the holster, pointed it at the bad guy, and the bad guy got shot. Now, legally you would have been okay to do so. However, because you did not say you intentionally pulled the trigger, or you can't fully say you intentionally pulled the trigger, that's where some questions can arise. And anything close to that, combined with a rather competent criminal attorney or a civil attorney, they could say, well, the defendant here did not intend to shoot the victim. The defendant pulled their pistol out, and then, based on the fact that the Walther PDP, per Walther's literature, this trigger in the PDP is not safe to use and has a high chance of an unintentional discharge, the defendant unintentionally shot the victim, therefore manslaughter, or therefore he's paralyzed for life now, and so now you're held civilly liable. Because in a criminal courtroom, the standard is beyond a reasonable doubt, meaning there is no doubt in the jury's mind that you are guilty. Now, that doesn't always work out. We've seen plenty of times where it is politicized, or you have a jury that is swayed based on circumstance, and they still convict someone. However, civilly, it's even worse, because the standard is not beyond a reasonable doubt. It is preponderance of the evidence, which is not a very high standard. It's just saying, based on the majority of the evidence here, this person's guilty of this. And a jury that has no knowledge of firearms, a judge that has no or limited knowledge of firearms, then being presented with this information saying, hey, this guy's owning this gun where the literature says it has this trigger in it, and per Walther's other literature, this trigger has a high chance of an unintended discharge. This person is liable and negligent, and therefore caused this person to be paralyzed for life, or caused this family to lose their loved one, or whatever the accusation may be. Now, I know it might be seeming like I'm jumping around and making a lot of hypotheticals, but we have to do that when we're carrying a deadly weapon around and could potentially deploy it to defend ourselves. We have to make sure that we are covered, not just in the moment of that defensive shooting, but afterwards in the courtroom, we are covered and we were not doing anything that could potentially come back to bite us if we can help it. So the fact that Walther has this literature, to me, is incredibly concerning, and as an owner of a PDP with a DPT installed from the factory, I would never, at this point, carry it for anything other than competition or range use. A lot of people might think I hate Walther, or I have something against Walther, I've made all these negative videos about the PDP, but no, I want the PDP to be successful. I want there to be successful pistols out there. I want every company out there that I like to be challenged by other companies, so that way they have to innovate and do better. And the PDP does do some things well. I'll be doing another video talking about the performance and improving the performance of the PDP. However, in this instance, I'm just very concerned, and I'm concerned for those who might be carrying a pistol that can meet these requirements and these scenarios. Because to me, Walther does not look out for their consumer enough. There have been several issues with the PDP that Walther never truly addressed. They did stealth fixes and then moved on. One of the biggest issues was the early PDPs, 2022 and prior, where they would be pushed out of battery, and if the trigger was pulled while they were pushed out of battery, so perhaps a self-defense situation where your pistol is being pushed into a barrier or a bad guy, and you pull the trigger, the gun obviously will not fire out of battery. That's pretty much every striker fire pistol on the market. However, when the gun would return the battery, the gun would then not fire because the trigger would be dead. Now, later iterations of the PDP, this has been fixed, including a previous PDP Pro I looked at and this PDP Pro X right here. So that issue's been addressed, but Walther never released any statements. Walther never said what they fixed. In fact, on my earlier PDP and Brett of Nightwood Guns, which had the same issue with the PDP of the slide locking open because the rounds were jamming as they were feeding, Walther never addressed how that was happening, what was going on. They didn't even tell him what they fixed. They just sent him the gun back and his magazines and said it's good to go now. The only time Walther has actually truly said they've changed something on the PDP and have made statements about it is when they changed the optic mounting system, and that's because it was so obvious it wasn't something that could be hid. So even if Walther has fixed the DPT, even if the DPT is 100% drop safe and there's no chance of it having an unintended discharge whatsoever, Walther has not released anything, nor do I think they will release anything to say there was an issue in the past and we fixed it, or there never really was any issue and it was just more over concern on our end. So to me, this is very concerning. If I were you, I would not buy a drop-in DPT for your PDP if you intend to use it for serious use. And if you have a PDP Pro that comes with a DPT matching the same drop-in DPT from the factory, I would have a lot of reconsiderations before I use this for duty or self-defense use. Now, at the end of the day, I'm not a lawyer. This is not legal advice. This is just the concern of a fellow shooter, a fellow self-defender who has seen this information, has learned this information, has done their research on this, and honestly sees the potential for liability if you carry a DPT that comes in a stock PDP Pro, or especially if you have one of the drop-in kits where Walther especially is saying this is not safe to carry. So I'm not only worried for the safety of those people, but for the potential fact that they could be held civilly and criminally liable in the future, when in reality, they did nothing morally wrong. All right, guys, if you enjoyed the video, if you like seeing me do some journalisming about Walther and the PDP, then go ahead and leave a like down below. If you are a Walther fan, you think I'm just a Walther hater and I'm trying everything I can just to hate on Walther, then go ahead, leave a dislike. Otherwise, guys, head in those comments. Have you had issues with your Walther DPT? Do you have a pistol that has a DPT either from the factory or that you installed? And were you aware of this warning that Walther has on the product? Go ahead and let me know in the comments down below. Otherwise, guys, I'm releasing new videos every Saturday, so subscribe and stay tuned.